Here's another, this is a fairly small painting, but again, this was inspired by sitting in the back garden, and the plant life is just very, very loosely indicated with watercolor. And then I've come in with a unipin marker pen to pick out the shapes of some leaves and other little patterns here and there, some stalks on the right, for example, that, you know, just to add a little bit of definition. So it's a very, very loose treatment. But then the sheep, these have been, I cheated a little bit on this one. I had some photos of sheep on my phone. So I just still sat outside, but I just used those to roughly sketch in the shape of some sheep, and then very quick watercolor washes applied to capture the light and dark falling onto the animals. Now, with this lamb here on the left, what I've done is the big bulky shadows that you can see on the face and the chest and the front legs, they're copied from the photograph. But then on the back, I've kind of added a few little patches of shadow to suggest that the leaves in the garden are casting shadows. The plant life is casting shadows onto the back of the animal. When I've got these little bits of granulation, or the little blooming, or cauliflowers, whatever you want to call it, I've deliberately left those. I quite like that effect, especially on something as textured as the fleece of a sheep. But I've left that little lamb less detailed than the main animal, and I've taken a bit more care with the pen work. But again, kept the watercolor washes fairly loose, added a bit more color to that one as well. But then, whoops, then you can see in the background, we've got another little animal, another sheep peeking out from the foliage, perhaps about to ambush the other two. So I try to think of they're not sort of comedy pieces as such, but there's hopefully a little bit of humor in many of these surreal paintings. Here's another garden-inspired painting. Again, very loose watercolor washes were applied while sitting out in the back garden. And then the sheep were roughly indicated using washes of watercolor. And then the unipin marker was used to just kind of define the shapes a little more clearly. But you can see for the animals on the left, there's almost no detail. And I have been careful to include, however, the cast shadows that the ears are making on the bodies of those two animals. Similar treatment for the sheep on the right, although there's a little bit more detail. Started to include the eyes on two of those. But then for the main animal, you can see there's more pen work. It's done in a bolder way, slightly thicker nib, and there are more features on the face. And then finally, to help create a, or further create a sense of depth. So notice the background foliage is barely defined, just very light intermingling washes of watercolor. As mentioned, the distant animals are defined a little more, and then the main animal is defined much more. And even the cast shadow underneath the animal is defined with the unipin marker pen. There's more detail there. But then to add a further sense of depth, we need a bit more foreground punch. So this is, I think, orange, more or less straight out of the tube for these leaves, which I've then just painted without any line work, but then used the shape created and added a bit more detail and a bit of texture with the pen. And here I've even added some cast shadows on these leaves, you can see here. So all of these little steps, these little increases in detail and texture or cast shadow, they help to create a sense that that object is closer to you. So I think this creates quite a nice sense of the sheep standing in some kind of glade, or perhaps they're tiny sheep standing in a normal sized garden.